Welcome to this month's Voyage Fromage. Super, super excited about this. I know we have folks who are going to be joining us a bit later and who couldn't make it. So, for everybody who did, thank you for joining. My name's Julia. I'm the owner of Fromage Kitchen. And the reason I wanted to do the British Territorials theme this month was because in March, I was able to visit north of London, probably about 11 dairies on what's called the Northern Run. And so we worked with Neal's Yard Dairy closely. They are a wholesaler, they're a retailer of specialty cheeses, specializing in UK cheeses, primarily based in London. We've had a relationship with them for a very, very long time. And I've taken upon myself to really work with them closer and closer and closer each year because I find the work that they're doing to be incredibly valuable and important to the cheese industry. And so what's special about this trip, I joined David Lockwood, who is one of the owners of Neal's Yard Dairy, and he does this trip every month, and it's pretty epic. It's, as you can see from the map that Morgan is sharing, we start in London and we leave at about, I think it was probably like 4:45 in the morning is when we set off, and we hit all of the farms featured in the map. And so what we're tasting is, of course, just 4 of these. But what I found along the journey was that there were a lot of producers on this trip that we had never worked with before, that are not, the cheeses are not even exported to the US yet. And then some dairies that were just starting out as brand new dairies. And what was fascinating about this trip was watching David work with these cheesemakers, these new cheesemakers, and see the mentorship in action in how he's helping to sustain this artisan cheesemaking culture for the future and for future generations. But then beyond that, working with the existing well-established producers, which we're tasting tonight, and really giving his opinions and thoughts on their processes and just the flavor profiles, and just really digging in to help them succeed as well. And so I'm really excited to highlight these cheeses, and we're going to finish with a cheese that I actually hand selected for Fromage Kitchen for this tasting while I was on that trip. So without further ado, we are going to start with the Wensleydale cheese. And this is Yoredale Wensleydale, and it is a fabulous, fabulous Wensleydale cheese that is made by Ben and Sam Spence. And what's interesting about this cheese, so if you just joined us, we're trying the Wensleydale first. So the Spence family is a young family that really has been established as a wonderful Wensleydale producer, but just recently moved to a larger facility. It's still quite small, and we've got photos of it coming up of their aging and cheeses. This is a cow's milk cheese. It's only aged for a few months, and it's a beautiful raw milk cheese with this natural rind. And I wanted to show the cave because I wanted to show how this rind is allowed to form with the beautiful sort of mucor mold going wild. And it's something that they encourage in their cellars. And it's a really stark contrast to the incredibly sort of almost tart, bright, lactic interior. You don't get as much of that earthiness as you would expect from a rind like this. And so I definitely encourage you when you try this cheese to first kind of break it apart. And what you should notice about this cheese primarily is the crumb. And when we were working with all of these cheesemakers, it was so much more than just flavor. We talked a lot about texture, and it's a pretty critical part of cheese making that I think sometimes is overlooked. And some of these cheeses, the hallmark of these cheeses is the texture. So it should have this bounciness of the fresh curd, a brightness to it. This is in their cheese cave. And this is an example of the wheels when they're very, very young, before they have allowed that, or before the mold has been able to really take over. And you can see on probably best on that third shelf up, the sort of divots, that's actually cloth. So the reason why this cheese is maintaining that sort of brightness and cleanliness is because it does have a slight protective barrier from the outside. Whereas we've talked in the past about Tome de Savoie, where that same type of mold is allowed to go crazy on the cheese, but there is no barrier between the paste of the cheese and the mold, as you have here, which is the cloth. And so with the Tome de Savoie, you actually end up with a cheese that's quite earthy on the inside, whereas this, you get that really nice sort of bright, lemony, punchy, lactic interior, but you also get that beautiful richness. And if you go forward, you can see what we're doing here is actually tasting and selecting the batches. And the little guy in front is his son, who still doesn't have clogs that quite fit, but he was the expert quality assessment officer during our visit and tasted every single piece that we tried. But what we did was what David is doing on this trip. I was just a guest, and I was there for my own learning, my own education. What David is doing and what he does in each visit is his selection. And so what that means is that they're trying batches, and obviously there's various date ranges. And so he's been doing this every month for years and years and years. And so he's now on the next batch from when he tasted last time, to then hand select the wheels that will come to London to Neal's Yard Dairy. And it's important for them to get the profile that they want of all of these specific cheeses, but then beyond that, to be able to give the feedback. And what I find really special is, as someone who has moved a cheese cave from our old shop at 244 Huron Ave to our new shop at 358 Huron Ave, it's a pretty scary endeavor because you have all of these beautiful natural molds that have developed in your cave, and you're upending everything and moving to a new area. And so they have since moved to the Bolton estate and created this beautiful new facility. And luckily, due to their experience and expertise, and of course, any assistance from David, Neal's Yard, and the cheesemaking community, they were able to prep their cheese caves in a way that has really allowed them to not skip a beat. And the cheeses are really, really thriving. So this is a cheese that I love. A lot of these cheeses from north of London, these territorial cheeses, you will find that lactic quality is very pronounced and intentional. I very affectionately call these breakfast cheeses. That doesn't mean that I only eat them for breakfast, but they really do shine and have a bright cleanness. And how we sampled a lot of these cheeses in the homes of the farmers and the cheesemakers is for breakfast on a big piece of freshly made bread, oftentimes with a big hunk of bacon. And that's it. And it's delicious. And that sort of brightness of the cheese cuts into the fat really, really nicely of any of those sort of rich elements that you add to your your plowman's breakfast. Are there any questions about the Wensleydale? And one thing I should note too is a lot of these names might sound very familiar. Wensleydale, Cheshire, Lancashire. There's a lot of similar, I think the best way to describe it is brie or cheddar, where you will find a lot of mass-produced versions of some of these cheeses, and in a lot of cases, almost no small artisan raw milk producers left, with the exception of these. We are lucky that we do have more than one small artisan Wensleydale producer left, and we particularly love this one, but there are some other incredible ones out there. For some of the other cheeses that we're tasting, that's it. These are the only makers left making these small batch artisan cheeses in this style, in the traditional way. And upcoming, we're actually going to hear from some of the cheesemakers about why they do what they do. So the next cheese that we're going to be hitting is Applebee's Cheshire. And Applebee's Cheshire, so this photo, I know it's small, but these little one-sheeters are fabulous. They're on Neal's Yard Dairy's website, and I think they do a really nice job of capturing both sort of the necessary information about the cheese, that, where it's from, is it raw milk, how old it is, but then also the photo in the is quite literally in their kitchen. So Sarah, who is the blonde in the kind of the middle of the picture, is sort of the matriarch of the family, and she has taken on sort of the mantle of using her, I guess you'd call it her grandmother-in-law's recipe book, where she learned, because the farm is actually her husband's family. But she has taken on the mantle of being the head cheesemaker and affineur, because they do everything on their farm. They have the animals on their farm. They make the cheese actually right off of their kitchen. You can see into their cheesemaking room, and their home is right there as well. So it really truly is a family-run operation, and they make their Applebee's Cheshire, which is a classic bright orange, another very beautiful lactic territorial cheese. Cow's milk as well. Everything we're enjoying tonight is cow's milk. It's just a very classic to use cows in this region. There are other milks used. There are some sheep's milk cheeses in the region that we tasted, but primarily you're going to find cow's milk. So once again, you'll notice this one's a touch older, but break that piece off, smell it. It should smell like fresh curd. That's why I love a lot of these young lactic cheeses, is it really does smell like that fresh curd. And when you break it, you want to look, and it actually looks like fresh curd as well. And you can see kind of how the curd fell. And that is what this cheese should be. It should be creamy and delicate. The side effect of being outside on a beautiful day is that my dog is on guard watch. So there might be barking from time to time. You can see the pathway of the curd, and it's really beautiful because it is supposed to be a light cheese. If you go back one, sorry, Morgan. So in the hat is David, and then Sarah's to the right, and her son is in the hat, and then I'm in the middle, and this is their home. And if you keep going, if you do one more slide, you'll see how beautiful their home is. It's a very old home, and it requires a lot of upkeep, and they really utilize every resource they have to be able to take care of things. And really their primary function is the cheese and taking care of the cheese. So, talking to Sarah, she talked about how, sometimes the house gets a little bit neglected, but it's all for the cheese. And so this is where we are making the cheese in the morning. And like I said, it's right off of their kitchen. And if you go forward one, so this is where he's really showing the curd, and the smell of the curd is so pronounced, and it really stuck with me. I was pretty struck in a couple instances, particularly with the Cheshire and the Lancashire, of how flavorful the curd was. Oftentimes, curd can be very mild or bland, but in the case of these, absolutely fantastic. And so this is a raw milk cheese, and basically he's showing me the vat of and the curd size that he is looking for in the Cheshire. And if you could, and so what's really special too is the traditional presses that they're using. And so we talk a lot about moisture in cheese, and moisture is good, and moisture also needs to be expelled. And so you'll find that a lot of these traditional cheesemakers are still using these traditional presses. And so they have collections that have been handed down to them from family members, or that they have found over time. They look alike, but they're actually there are some differences between them. It's very, very challenging to like, you would have to have these absolutely custom made today. You can't just buy them. It's just unheard of. And so you can imagine how it works with just the hand crank, and you're getting a lot of natural pressure. And it's just a really great traditional method for pressing your cheeses. And let's see, I don't remember what slide we had next. Yes, this is their aging facility, which is, because their cheese, you notice it's quite a bit older than the Wensleydale. They have very little temperature control or humidity control in their aging facility. It is rustic, and it is allowing just the natural environment to dictate the ebb and the flow of the cheeses, which is really special. And so when we were in there in March, we were tasting batches from January, and this was the selection of batches that we were trying. And the great thing is troubleshooting with the maker. And I always have said about Fromage Kitchen is that our goal is to limit the number of hands that touch a product from producer to consumer. And because of that, there's so many reasons. There's the financial reasons, where you're cutting out middlemen to provide more money to the maker. But it's the dialogue. That is what is so critical, especially for us, is the dialogue that's created, because oftentimes these cheesemakers, they are making cheese from dawn till dusk. They don't get a feedback loop. They don't get anyone at shops, cheesemongers, or very rarely saying, hey, this batch tasted like this, or this batch tasted like this. Our mongers and customers loved that batch from last September, but that batch from November was a little bit wonky. That feedback is so critical to them, and it also makes their cheese feel more alive, because they can understand the people who are enjoying it, who are learning about it. And that connection is so critical, because, as I said, this is one of the last small production raw milk Cheshire producers in the UK. And so we need to support these producers to ensure that they hand it off to the next generation or continue it on themselves. It's so, so critical, because there are so many challenges with cheese making, and there are so many hurdles to overcome, that we have to be able to provide as much as we can give that will help them along the way. And so what David does every month is pretty critical for that relationship with them, because he is that immediate feedback loop. And for me, coming from the States and kind of wrapping how their cheeses are being presented in the US, is just a different level of feedback that I think all of them found astonishing, because they're some of the most humble people you ever met. And so I think it still blows a lot of their minds that they're kind of mini celebrities in the cheese world in the US. And you know, we love their cheeses. We cherish what they do. I think it's incredibly special, and we hold them on such a high pedestal. And so it's really nice to be able to share that with them and recognize the work that they do. And so it was really fun going back to their aging room, which really is dictated by the temperature. I remember David and sorry, David and Sarah talking about the texture and how it was problematic. They were very open and honest from this batch, and we were able to select some beautiful wheels. So, but they're, you know, we're talking about like fine tooth comb. And Sarah was looking at her notes from the weather and thinking about, oh, you know what? It was actually a lot colder during the make. And so that probably attributed to the curds being a little bit more firm, seized up, and, you know, in that make room, and not able to age in the same way that you would age, you know, that some of the more supple wheels are aged in a slightly warmer environment. So really fun. This was the first visit that we made on the trip. So for me, I was watching and learning and listening because I wanted to understand how they interacted. And I wanted to watch that because I felt like it was a really special experience for me to be able to bear witness to this sort of relationship that they have created and built and fostered and nurtured. So so similar yet very different from the Wensleydale, but you still get a lot of that complexity. You get the brightness, but a little bit more age. So are there any questions about the Cheshire? I guess I didn't talk about, well, the next cheese we have is even more orange. And so I can talk about the color comes from a natto seed. And so that's where you are getting the orange color.
Which one are we on now?
So we're eating Applebee's Cheshire right now.
Thank you.
The next up is the Spark and Hoe Red Leicester.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So if there are no other questions, and I actually want to dig in a little bit more about a natto seed and the origin of it. And I need to do my own research. I've done some preliminary research just over the years out of interest. And from what I've dug up is this sort of the initial use of a natto seed was to show quality of milk, because when you would have a butter or a cheese that was a really dark yellow color, it would indicate, you know, a really rich, fatty quality milk. And so they would actually introduce a natto seed in order to kind of all to get that sort of color, to make it seem like it is a richer, fattier milk. But again, preliminary research, I don't know how much truth there is to that. I still need to dig in a lot more. Okay, so next up, we're doing the Spark and Hoe Red Leicester. This is by far the most aged. And so you can see that this is made by David Clark and Joe, and you've got the entire write-up here, and actually you'll see a really similar picture as to what you see down there later on when we do the tasting. Now this is, I'm just checking to see if this lists, so it does list this as raw milk, and it's actually, this particular one is pasteurized, and I can talk a little bit about that and kind of the struggles that they have in the UK right now with pasteurizing and raw milk cheese. But if we can go on to the next slide. So I've had great luck in England and Scotland. Whenever I go, no matter the time of year, it's sunny and beautiful. And so I don't understand why people say that it's cloudy and rainy, because I still have not experienced it. So I came on the day that they let the cows out. And so it was a really special day because what they have to do is, it's such a wet, damp winter. The cows will actually not be able, the ground will be too muddy and they will sink and they will destroy the grasses and they won't have anything to graze on. And so they have to wait until the ground is firm enough to allow the cows to get out into the pasture. And it's interesting. I was talking a little bit about could have definitely spent longer at each farm because animal husbandry and the raising of the animals is really interesting to me as someone who grew up doing 4-H. And, talking about the different breeds of cows that certain farmers will actually have on their farm to help offset the challenges from the seasonality and the wetness. So there are certain breeds of cows that can go out a little earlier and others that have to stay in, depending on the size of the cow and the stability of the cow in the mud and dealing with the grasses and whatnot. But for the most part, they will be in the barn over the winter. And like I said, this was mid-March is when they finally, it was a beautiful day, sunny, and they were let out. And so they're raising all the animals on the farm around them. And if you go to the next slide. So this visit was interesting. So this is not the cheese that we are enjoying, but it is a cheese. One of the cheeses that we really dug into on this visit, which is Spark and Hope Blue. And Spark and Hope Blue has not been in the United States for many, many years. And we at Fromage Kitchen have been really excited to bring it back into the States. And so we did just receive a test wheel. So it's just for the mongers. We're assessing it and it's beautiful. And we're really, really excited with how it turned out and how it shipped and how it arrived. It held up beautifully. And so this is, again, part of our relationship with Neil's Yard is to be able to have these test wheels so that we can make sure that, the cheese is we're doing right by the cheese. We want to be able to wrap it properly. So that was a really important part of the visit. So they really focus on 2 cheeses. They focus on their blue cheeses, and then they focus on the Spark and Hoe Red Leicester, their aged cheese. So we were in their cellar, and they had a number of these cheeses that we were tasting through the batches of. And so again, I encourage you to break this open and smell. So this one is going to be a much richer smell. It doesn't have quite that lactic tang that the other 2 have. This is cloth bound and it's rubbed in lard to seal it. And it's aged typically at least a year, but they do have a Spark and Hoe extra aged, a Spark and Hoe Red Leicester extra aged, which is aged quite a bit longer because this cheese does age quite nicely. What you're going to get from this is a lot more savory notes. You still get a brightness, which is really nice. It still hits the top of your palate, but it really gets the back of your palate with the savory, rich brothiness and a lot of cavey earthiness, which I love. And so they do a really beautiful job here with these cheeses, and it was fantastic to taste through them. Their challenge is bovine tuberculosis is why a lot of these cheeses have to be pasteurized. There's sort of an epidemic in the UK that is transmitted by badgers. And that's usually the sort of canary in the coal mine, I guess I would call it, to indicate whether or not, if you see a badger anywhere on your field, then it's an indication that you have to pasteurize your milk. And all of the milk is tested. any raw milk producer is under strict, regulations to constantly test their milk, and they do their due diligence. So these cheeses are perfectly safe, and they go the extra step because if there is any risk of this bovine tuberculosis, they pasteurize the cheeses for a certain period of time just to make sure. And of course, that goes alongside and corresponds with testing of the milk. So they're back to making the raw milk cheese. All of their herd tested negative. So everything was fine. But again, it's about an abundance of caution, and that's what a good cheesemaker does. And it depends on what area you are in. And we've actually had several cheesemakers, talk about moving to different areas because of this issue. Because, when you talk about making a pasteurized cheese versus an unpasteurized cheese, they're different cheeses. It's a different process, start to finish. And so it really is like making two different cheeses. And so if you're consistently making raw milk cheese and then have to pivot, it really does throw your makeup quite a lot. But luckily, they are so talented. I feel like this one did not skip a beat. And I didn't talk much about the accompaniments. I just really wanted to highlight the cheese and have some really classic UK accompaniments. And so honestly, I included the stem ginger shortbread specifically for this cheese because the stem ginger is a little biting. It's a little bit intense, but it's not it's not too intense. It matches, I think, the flavor, the intensity of this cheese. So it's a really fun combination. And then, of course, the Orkney oat cake is just a really classic cracker to pair with a lot of these cheeses. Very rustic, very earthy, buttery, pretty fantastic. So, all right. Do we have any questions before we move on?
Julia, so
yes.
sometimes these manufacturers, from what I understand, they test their milk, and the minute that milk is not good, they go to a pasteurized, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If there's even any indication.
Yeah, and then they stay in pasteurized until, like, I've had the blessing of being at Montgomery Cheddar, and they test, and then sometimes it will go to pasteurized.
Yep.
Or, yeah, they'll move back and forth.
Exactly. So the priority is, their preferences, I should say, is raw milk.
Yes.
That's the traditional way of making these cheeses, and it's a safe way of making these cheeses. But that being said, you still have to account for safety factors, and there's a lot of things that can impact the safety of a cheese, and a pasteurized cheese at that as well. And so in a way, I trust a lot of these raw milk makers more because they have to be so obsessive about their milk and about the testing of their milk and the cleanliness of their milk. These are all producers that are raising their own animals. They know what their animals are eating. They are taking care of their animals. They are milking them. They know that if they take any shortcuts in the milking process, it's only going to harm them because they're the cheesemakers as well. Yeah. So it really does. I find that the best quality and care and the most impeccably clean milking parlors I've ever been in are raw milk facilities because they have to be, but it's also that care that goes in when you are doing all that work start to finish. You put in the time. And you care about the animals, you care about their health, their well-being, all of it. So it's really a holistic view of, what you're doing in that region. And these cheeses are such a representation of this region that's so special. And I feel like, Italy did all that marketing in like the 80s and 90s about balsamic vinegar and olive oil. And they, got big in the US. France has always been known for their cheeses. Switzerland just crushed it with their marketing in the US of Gruyere. And the UK, just never invested. And that's not
they're humble.
They are.
They just don't, they go, don't people get this? And it's like, yeah.
Well, the other thing too is you have to recognize how valuable support is for a lot of these makers. And you see a lot of similarities between the UK and the US and the support that they get from their governments. Whereas in France, there's a ton of governmental support for agriculture, whether it's schooling or advanced degrees in agriculture or agriculturally related professions. There's subsidies available. You know, you have the consortiums in Italy that are incredibly, you know, yes, are, you know, have there been issues with some of the consortiums in Italy with, you know, mob activity? Yes, absolutely. But that being said, you know, when you get a government behind and, you know, that money essentially and power behind making things a traditional way, it makes a huge impactful difference. And when you look at these farmers, and because that's what they are farmers. When you look at them, and they live very simply and they work very hard, and you know, they do not have a large capacity for loss or a bad season or a bad year. God forbid they take a vacation, because they can't, because they have all the animals. So it really is up to us to help to highlight what they're doing, because at any given moment, you know, we don't want them to wake up and say, what is this all for?
Why would I do this anymore? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's really, really important that we show that these are traditional methods that, you know, go back to, like, you know, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that nobody is doing anymore. And so it's very, very special. This next cheese is the last surviving traditional raw milk artisan Lancashire that there is. And so, you know, it's hearing Graham talk about this cheese and why he does it is inspiring, and he's frustrated and inspired at the same time, which I get. Like, you can't have one without the other, because it's a challenging industry. But he's very passionate about making sure that for him, if he doesn't make raw milk Lancashire, it's not traditional. So what's, you know, it's not what's the point, but like, that's not what he's here to do. And so that's the intro into the next and last cheese that we're having, is that Kirkham's Lancashire. And so Morgan has this great video from, I secretly taped, I did ask him, but I found that I just held my phone up having conversations with some of our cheesemakers, and that's where I could really get the true kind of artistry coming from their soul of like why they do what they do. So I love this clip from Graham, who's the head.
So that is, you know, a proper Lancashire recipe is 2-day curds, 3-day curds. Yeah. But ours will be, so when I say 2-day curds, one will be 3 days old. Yeah. So that's the traditional. So when we say words like territorial, traditional, farmhouse, it is what it is. You know, it's not made up. You know, it really is proper old-fashioned farmhouse Lancashire, made to a proper old-fashioned farmhouse recipe. It is what it is. It says what it does on the label. You know. So, you know, and again, that's what we're about. We are.
How long? So I love that. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
I can't replicate the accent, so I'm not going to try. But, you know, they're doing this. And when you walk into their make room, I've never had cheese curd taste as flavorful as tasting the fresh curd from his make. And you are consumed by the smell of the curd. And what he's saying is it's 3-day curd because you make it's two batches of curd. And that happened because of in the old days, when you had lots of these traditional Lancashire producers, the farms were too small and they didn't have enough milk production to make a whole batch. So they would save they'd curd the cheese and then they'd add to it the next day. And so you had these multiple days worth of curd. And so if you go on to the next, you'll show kind of how physical the work is that goes into making this cheese.
Did it? And go for an hour and a half No, I'll do about 8 to 10 minutes.
So I've never stood up on camera, but I'm 5 feet tall. 5'1" on a good day. And I physically couldn't do that. His vat, as you saw, he's hand stirring. Most vats have a mechanism to cut the curd by machine, and he's doing it all by hand. He's stirring it by hand. He's cutting the curd by hand. It's incredibly time consuming. It's incredibly labor intensive. But for him, again, it's the traditional way. He can get his hands on the curd. He can see it. He can feel it. If you are a machine, you can't feel the curd. You can feel how much, when you're cutting it, and you can feel the give. He knows by touch how long he needs to stir, where he's at. And all of that matters when you get to the final make process. So. And so
I made a cheesemaker one time, and he said you can feel as you go through that water, just by the feel on your arm, how sharp it is where it's at in the process. And I'm like, but they're so amazing. Yeah.
And I've always said that cheese is a living, breathing thing, and it starts at the beginning. And it is an artistry, and it's an art that requires touch and feel and nuance. And we're not looking for a homogeneous product because animals and seasonality is not a homogeneous thing. So the milk that you get from the springtime is vastly different than the milk that you get from the fall. And so you're going to produce different cheeses, different so you have to ebb and flow and adapt to those minor nuances and minor changes. And I think that's where you really see these small producers, especially these small raw milk producers, shine, because that's their wheelhouse, because they are gently pivoting with the seasons, and they can do that. You can turn on a dime to make those changes that are required to make the cheese that is going to be the best. And so here we have the cheese freshly made, and I love this, like gently bound in this perfect little cloth and tied off and trimmed by hand so that it would age perfectly. And then if you go to the next slide.
It's so beautiful.
Then we went into their caves, and that's when we started doing the selection. And one thing that I really wanted to do on this trip was to talk to the makers. I do this with every cheesemaker I go to. I say, how do you intend for your cheese to taste? What do you want the texture to taste like? What do you want because oftentimes they say, well, do you like it? Like I want to know what they want, and I want to represent the best cheese on our counter for what their goal is and their intention is. And so that was this conversation with Graham, and we were tasting through a lot of January and February batches, and we tasted a lot of cheese, and both of us were pretty blown away by how good the batches were, how brothy and savory, but still bright, and the texture was beautiful. And so we really struggled nailing down a batch that was the best because they were so good. And he was excited. You could tell because he was so proud of how good these batches were. They were really extraordinary. But when I was chatting with him about his goals and what he wanted, it came down to texture and moisture and flavor. But really texture was always at the forefront of what he was saying. So that's what I want you to think about when you try this cheese.
Is texture coming from the aging process or because taste would come from the milk, correct?
Mhm.
So texture would come from how they care for it. Is that right?
It is. It's a lot of things.
Or how because I learned about, cheddaring and how they
Yeah.
stack the curds.
So texture can come from the make as well as the animal and the milk type.
Mhm.
It can also come from how it's aged and how it's transported and stored. So a number of different things affect the texture. With this, I was
No easy answer.
no
Julia.
easy answer. No, really. There's too many variables in cheese that can affect and impact the final outcome. But what blew my mind was, okay, so this is where I had fun, because I have David Lockwood at right here next to me, and I'm tasting a cheese that I have had so many times on the counter at Fromage Kitchen. And I'm like, this is not the same cheese that I've eaten at Fromage Kitchen on the counter. The cheese that we get in is much drier. And so I started asking questions, and I said, David, like, how long will it be until this batch that we've selected will come to London and then, make its way by boat to the US? So we were talking about the logistics, and I realized that, again, the communication is so critical to these relationships.
Mhm.
They send these cheeses off on a boat. It arrives in New York, but they don't necessarily know, like, at what point does it reach our counter, and at what texture, what shape, all of that. And so I said, I really want to ship this batch. So we bought 5 wheels on the spot from the batch that we loved. And I said, I want this for our club, and I want to try to get it as fast as possible. And so David said, well, we have drivers who come here twice a week. That's no problem. We'll bring it, we'll bring it right away to London, and we'll get it on a boat. And so we brought it in probably a month earlier than typical. And it was astonishing, the difference. And we opened it up on the cheese counter. And again, this is not a proper experiment because we have one trial. So we have to do this many more times. We have to eat more of this cheese.
Yeah.
We have to test it out. But what we realized was we were kind of using the London model, so to speak, where they're getting the cheese really at its peak condition of how Graham wants to sell this cheese.
Mhm.
But then it's coming by boat with refrigeration, which is drying out the cheese even more.
Yeah.
And so by the time it gets to us, it's still delicious and wonderful, but not exactly as he had intended, or his goal at least. And when we tasted this cheese, we were like, well, this is fabulous. This is what we want. And so now it's really fun. I've been emailing back with Neal's Yard Dairy to talk about how we can adjust the timing, and because we have a cheese cave. So once it gets to our cave, we're kind of back in the safe zone. It's got the high humidity, it's in a happy environment. And so it's really about trying to get it over a bit faster so that we can, again, I want people who come to our shop to taste a cheese that they've had when they went to Lancashire and say, that taste, I've not had a cheese, except in Lancashire, that tasted like this. And so for us, representing that in the most honest way possible is really, really important. And so that was a really fun aspect of this trip, to be able to have that relationship with Graham and Neal's Yard, and hopefully be able to continue on in that sort of experiment. And because, who knows, it could have been a fluke. We want to keep pushing the boundaries and trying so that we can represent this cheese in the best way possible. And
What's just one of those wheels weigh, Julia?
probably about 20 pounds.
Oh, I'm thinking I could bring it. No.
We'll throw it in the suitcase.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how many slides we have left, Morgan. Maybe just a couple, right? One. That's it. So that's it. That's Graham, and we'll see what happens. I have also invited Graham and a couple other cheesemakers to my hometown rodeo. And so hopefully that happens, because I think that 4 English cheesemakers at a good old Western rodeo is something that I will definitely document for people, because I think it'd be a really good time. But again, I realized how quickly I connected to these folks because, I grew up around farmers, and that's what these guys are. And so going back to Graham and his passion and goals with this cheese, he has experienced challenges. He has, gotten frustrated with just how challenging cheese making can be. And so for me, it was very fun to talk to him about how much our customers love his cheese and how much they appreciate raw milk cheese, because I think sometimes it does feel like you're shouting into the void, when you're really doing this hard work, very, very hard work, to make cheeses a very traditional way. So that's where our feedback comes in and our support comes in and becomes really, really important. So if anybody does try these cheeses and love them, or want to send a message to any of the makers, feel free to email me, just julia@fromagekitchen.com. I'll pass along any messages of support, of feedback about the cheeses that you tried, what you loved, and even what you didn't. It's all really valuable and helpful, because I think it's just really fun letting them know that there is a huge group of people who cares deeply about what they do, and we want it to continue, because Lord knows, there's not many cheeses like this out there. The flavor is very unique and distinct. All these sort of territorial cheeses with that lactic quality. And I think the Pillsbury family commented early on about the Wensleydale and how you could eat it all day long, and I totally agree. The Lancashire I grated onto tacos, because the tartness reminded me of a nice cotija. Sometimes I just like to mimic, even though it's not traditional at all, obviously. I just wanted some bright tart, and it was fabulous. It was so good. So yeah, I too could eat these cheeses all day long. But does anybody have any questions before we wrap up for the night? I can't believe it was almost an hour. I feel like it was like a blink.
Oh, but they were such amazing cheeses.
They really are.
Yeah.
I was such a special trip and special visit, because these are some really beautiful family run cheesemaking operations, and to see it firsthand, and to be able to be invited into their homes for a cup of, everybody. It was a cup of tea first, which, as a tea drinker, I was in heaven. A cup of tea first, and then we got to meet the animals. We got to meet the kids or the dogs, or the cows, and saw the facility, and then oftentimes watched the cheese being made, and then went to the aging cellar and tasted. And it was just a really special experience that I want to do my best to share, and show how special these cheesemakers are, and how rare it is to find folks so dedicated to their craft, who are really just doing it for the passion of the craft, and that's it. Nothing more than that. So
Julie, these were great. Thank you. We really enjoyed them. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yay.
Thank
I'm so
you.
glad you enjoyed them. Thank you
They
so
were
much
phenomenal.
Great. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. And if anybody obviously has any questions, send me an email. But if there's nothing else, then I will see you all next month.